Hi, here I wanted to discuss a German teacher, writer, and philosopher Gunnar Kaiser, who was well known, at least in the German community, for publicly speaking up against the lockdowns and societal transformations during the last 3.5 or so years. So he did this, for instance, through his YouTube channel. He conducted numerous interviews and published a novel, and before that actually short stories and poems, and later 2 non-fictional books about current events. As he recently passed away due to cancer, I wanted to use this occasion to make a video about cancer, the origin of illness, and about enlightenment. In particular, there's confusion in the community that several outspoken people have left this earth. And as Gunnar chose to live his life until his end very publicly, I will use his specific example to discuss the psychological problems which can lead to physical illness, including cancer. As he was very outspoken, liked to debate, be a role model, teach and enlighten, I am pretty sure he would approve. And that we learn from his life, the good and the bad, to further help people. I must say I admired him for being articulately outspoken and his insightful contributions. While many of his videos were a bit academic, in German one says schwurbeln, which doesn't translate well into English. Positively said, it's philosophizing or theorizing. More negatively, one could say rumbling monologues. In particular, during the lockdowns, he gave many people a voice, questioning things, ridiculing things, the measures in particular, exposing inconsistencies and crimes, like the early videos on the crawling or submissive people or the Nazis. He gave up his civil servant teaching job and inspired people to follow their dreams. Towards his end, he became more disappointed, depressed, and getting news of his illness did the rest. I very much hope one day when all this is over, potentially after a major cataclysmic event, schools or universities will be named after him. And all this would be well deserved in doing his major contributions justice. However, all this does not teach or help us a lot at the moment, so here I wanted to be a bit more critical for educational reasons, and I expect Gunnar would not mind open debate and scrutinizing, as he was very public and a role model for many. And I want to do this as respectful as possible to provide insight. To start with, a few months ago, he made a self-reflective video entitled Have I Done Enough? Or in German, Habe ich genug getan? In which he looks back at his life and wonders whether he did enough to be considered a morally or spiritually good person when he meets his maker. By some, this was considered immensely insightful, honest and humble. While he did also mention contributions to raising his family, but at a very general level, what he mainly seemed to mean is speaking up against negative transformation in the society during the last few years. Clearly, in light of this, as he did a million times more than most, this is not at all a humble question. How is a single mother of 2 who tried to protect her kids as much as she could, despite working and keeping food on the table, feel about this? Here, and in several other videos, clearly Gunnar's ego speaks up. An honest assessment of someone's life would, I imagine, cover many aspects, and aspects the public would not know about. So this should be done privately. I'm sure that he did this as well, but then the purpose of the video is less clear. And the main purpose may have been to create clicks, views, and a bit more fame and immortality. However, what I mainly wanted to get to is the sensitive topic of cancer, and also why several outspoken people, shall we say it, of the resistance movement recently died that way or left this earth in other ways. When I hear cancer, I think of Richard Nixon's War on Cancer from 1971, which, similar to the War on Terror, is as misguided and useless and even dangerous as it gets. And the fear people feel when they hear the diagnosis, as it is considered a death sentence for many, or at least they're exposed to the pressure when dealing with doctors and family members to undergo the poisonous chemotherapy, the golden cow of Big Pharma, which kills your cells with the hopes that it kills your cancer faster than the rest of your body. While I'm skeptical about Albert Einstein, a quote attributed to him says, "Madness is repeating the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome." This basically sums up the school medicine's approach to cancer. To anyone who did a bit of research and applied critical thinking, should understand that many illnesses, including cancer and many mental illnesses, are psychological in nature and as such can only be solved on that level. Having said this, the causes can be extremely subtle and complicated. Questioning a person's whole life history, and so solutions are often not found or rejected by the patient. Often major conflicts in the current life, but also family traumas and secrets, even in previous generations, can cause these. In the 1990s I came across the German doctor Ryke Geerd and his Germanic New Medicine with his 5 biological laws. He says that cancer stems from major inner conflicts, like losing someone, which create so-called Hama foci, special areas in the brain, which can be detected by CT scans, for instance, which then affect corresponding organs and lead, for instance, to cancer. When the biological conflict is solved, cancer should recede. Some also interpret that as cancer appears during the healing phase, for instance, that an organ then goes into overdrive to build itself up, to compensate, to heal itself. While very interesting ideas, he speaks a lot about biological conflicts manifesting in the evolutionary old brain, and in a modern world, it can be less clear how to solve them, which can create panic. In the 1990s, I also came across systemic psychotherapy by Bert Hellinger, also called family constellations, which, through empathy and insight, can nicely indicate and even solve conflicts and trauma, even from generations ago. Here people in a group session are set up in a family constellation to represent family members, often excluded or lost or undervalued. It's about creating and restoring balance within a family system. Sometimes when I try to understand what a person is about or what someone is struggling with, I look at what he or she does excessively in the outside world, which reflects inner processes, and often they try to overcompensate for a problem which is hard to solve. Such problems are often easier to solve in the outside, as solving them on the inside would often lead to questioning core assumptions or the foundations of someone's life. An excellent book on Bert Hellinger therapy is Gunnar Kaiser's, which is called Zweierlei Glück, or in English, Love's Hidden Symmetries, or more directly translated, 2 types or measures of happiness. Often cancer patients can be intrinsically happy about their diagnosis. It makes them important. Maybe they want to follow an outcast family member into death and disappear. This is one type of happiness. And you can see this when a cancer patient is literally excited, radiant, wants to learn about his or her cancer, feels even happy and fulfilled. When you see that, then the person is likely lost, does not want to be healed deep down. For someone to be healed, that person would need to be disgusted by his or her cancer and wants to get out of this as quickly as possible, because that person sees the ugly side of cancer. So the other type of happiness is a deeper one, where the patient understands what went wrong and in humility steps out of this role, gets smaller, heals, and goes on with more of an ordinary life. Coming back to Gunnar, he was undoubtedly very public, highly connected, outspoken, theorizing and questioning things, nothing bad here. But looking at him in videos and listening to his philosophizing, I see someone fully in his head, likely not well grounded, potentially emotionally starved, missing early physical affection and connection. His connection to masculinity is also somewhat interrupted, as he appears more comfortable with women than with men. The influence of his mother's side of his family seems stronger than his father's side, making it also harder for women to fulfill his high standards. Who can compete with his mother? To compensate for this lack of connection, physical connection, it seems he wanted to connect to the outside world, and instead of addressing his own trauma, it seemed easier for him to tackle the societal problems. So maybe I'm self-diagnosing and projecting on him, but this is just for educational reasons and it's not taken too seriously. At some point he spoke about depression, which also points towards an interrupted or strained bond to his mother or father. Of course, deep depression and life-threatening cancer can also point to deeper transgenerational issues. In stark contrast, he also showed signs of suffering from the unbearable lightness of being symptoms. So while he addressed serious issues in our society, he seemed light and detached, potentially indicating a wish to leave this planet. So faced with this severe illness, instead of becoming small and modest, Gunnar seemed to have preferred venturing out, talking to various healers, eating mushrooms, etc. Also, this is easier than facing the inner demons. So when I understand this correctly, he had cancer of the food pipe. So symbolically, it might mean that he found it difficult to swallow or accept something. So something he could not live with, and he had videos with such titles and topics. I wanted to end this lengthy video by reading about the potential cause of cancer from Pierre Fro's Lexicon of Family Constellations and conclude with two short stories from Gunther Weber's book Love's Hidden Symmetry, one on healing and one on finding oneself and personal growth. Okay, from the Lexicon on cancer. So the first point is here on cancer and family constellations, according to Hellinger. According to Hellinger and his constellation methods, the possible causes of cancer are very diverse and not fully understood yet. As with other life-threatening illnesses, such as multiple sclerosis, the succession dynamics is very pronounced. Behind this lies a subconscious death wish of the person setting up the constellation. Cancer patients often feel connected to family members who have experienced terrible things or died young. Out of solidarity, they want to die and get cancer. In the case of cancer, there's often a correlation with not being able to accept one's parents. Especially in breast cancer, in many cases it is evident that the relationship with a parent is highly stressed, even if the affected individuals believe they've long overcome it. Often these cancer patients are full of resentment and hatred because they feel mistreated by their parents. Many would rather die than give their mother the honor. It may also be that the parent died early or was absent. The solution lies in agreeing with the parents in love as they are. In relationships, a lack of respect for the partner can also trigger cancer. In some cases, breast cancer seems to be the atonement for a wrong done to man. Second point, cancer in multi-generational psychotrauma. For Dr. Franz Rupert, and Gunnar interviewed him actually, so he's familiar with his work, cancer often arises through the reactivation of an old trauma in conjunction with currently distressing events. In particular, attachment traumas and attachment system traumas can increase the risk of suffering a severe physical illness because feelings of fear, anger, and grief are suppressed. Rupert cites the example of a man who was diagnosed with skin cancer after his father's severe illness and the death of his son. A constellation was able to bring the original trauma to light. Often due to trauma-induced splitting, the feeling of one's own body becomes diffuse, and for example, the body is experienced as a foreign object. By working through the trauma, the feelings of one's own body can be developed again, and the medical treatments can become more effective. The healing. In the land of Aram, where Syria is today, there once lived an old general who was known wide and far for his courage and strength in battle. One day this old man became ill and could not have contact with any other people, not even his own wife. He had leprosy. He heard from a slave that there was a man in her land who could heal the illness. So the old general gathered a great column of followers, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, 10 ceremonial robes, and a letter of introduction personally written by the king, and set out to find this great healer. After a long journey and many adventures, he reached the house in which the healer lived, and he called out to be let in. He stood there with all his followers, with his treasures and with a letter of introduction written by his king, and he waited. But no one noticed him. He became impatient and somewhat nervous. A servant opened a little side door, approached him and said, "My master instructed me to tell you to wash in the river Jordan and you will be healed." The general thought he was being made a fool of. "What?" he exclaimed. "That's supposed to be a healer?" The very least he could have done was to come himself, call on his god, do a long and complex ritual, and then touch every sore on my body with his hand. That might have helped me, but no, this quack tells me I'm supposed to bath in the river Jordan. He turned away in rage and went home. Now, that's really the end of the story, but since it's a fairy tale, it has to have a good ending, so... As the old general was making his way home, the slave came to him again and spoke soothingly to him. Dearest master, if the healer had required something extraordinary of you, you would have done it. If he had required that you sail in a ship to far lands, that you worship strange gods, that you give up your wealth and go into contemplation for many years, you would certainly have done it. But he only asked of you that you do something ordinary. The general graciously allowed himself to be convinced by her. He made his way to the river Jordan, still very cross indeed, and bathed sullenly in his waters, quite against his better judgment. Against his expectations, a miracle happened, and he was cured. When he arrived home again, his wife was amazed to see him healthy and wanted to know all about what had happened. Oh, he said, I'm feeling pretty good, but other than that, nothing special happened. The disciples. A man is born into his country, into his culture, into his family. Even as a child, stories enchant him about the one who was their prophet and Lord, and he deeply longs to become like his ideal. He enters a long period of training until he is fully identified with his ideal, until he thinks and speaks and acts like him. But one last thing he thinks is missing, and so he sets out on a long journey into the most secluded loneliness when he hopes to cross the final barrier. On his way he passes old gardens long abandoned. Wild roses still bloom unseen, and the fruit that tall trees bear each year falls unnoticed to the earth. No one is there to gather it. So he walks on. He reaches the edge of the desert. Soon he is surrounded by unknown emptiness. He realizes that in this desert he could choose any direction he might wish. The emptiness remains the same. He sees that the great loneliness of this place has emptied all illusions in his mind's eye that would have led him onto any particular path. And so he wanders on, just where chance takes him, until one day, long after he has stopped trusting his senses, he is surprised to see water bubbling out of the earth in front of him. He watches the desert sand quietly soak it up again, but as far as the water reaches, the desert blooms like paradise. Still deep in wonder, he looks around and sees afar two strangers drawing near. They too have done what he has done. Each of them had followed his prophet and Lord until he had become almost identical with him. They too set out, as he had done, into the desert wastes, hoping to cross the final barrier. And they too, at last, had reached that spring. Then the three of them bent down together to drink the same water, and each feels his goal to be within his reach. Then they reveal their names. I have become one with the Lord, Gautama, the Buddha. I have become one with the Lord, Jesus the Christ. I have become with my Lord, Mohammed the Prophet. At last the night descends upon them. They see the heavens fill with shining stars unmoving, silent and utterly remote. They fall into awe-filled silence beneath the vastness of this eternity, and one of them senses for a moment how his Lord must have felt as he came to know the same impotence, to know the ultimate irrelevance of human design and to submit to that immensity, and he senses too how he must have felt as he understood the inescapability of guilt. He knows that he has gone too far, so he waits for dawn, turns homeward, and at last escapes the desert. Once again he passes the abandoned gardens, until at last he stops before the garden that he knows to be his own. An old man is standing by the gate, as if awaiting him. He says, "If someone has found his way home from as far away as you have done, he loves the moist and fertile earth. He knows that all that grows will die, and in dying nourishes what lives." The wanderer replies, "Now I submit to earth." Then he began to husband his garden with tender care. So coming back to the question from early on, why did many die of cancer and leave? Due to avoidance, there's a tendency for people to solve personal issues in the external world, and this was magnified during COVID. All internal issues could be projected on the external perpetrators and conditions, lockdowns, corrupt politicians, etc. This likely accelerated the process of people leaving this planet. What I said about Gunnar could similarly apply to many highly public or even famous people. Again, I thank Gunnar for his extraordinary insight and outspoken, candid nature during the lockdowns, and I hope that many find inspiration in him and that many good things will come out of his life, writings and interviews. And I also hope Gunnar's family does not mind me analyzing this. So I hope you found this little podcast useful and helpful and insightful. And please let me know in the comments in the comment section. So thank you very much for listening, and I talk to you soon. Bye.